So here's a big one that those in the old Earth camp will use. They'll look to day number 6, and they'll say that there's too many events, Dr. Grady, that occur on creation day 6 for it to be a 24-hour period. A couple things they'll look to: humans had to be created, God had to plant a garden, and then God had to bring the animals in the garden to Adam for him to name them all. And they argue that these events could not have all occurred in a single day. What would be a good response to that?
Well, first of all, let's point out, and people do not want to believe what the Bible says. Now, they want to pick and choose, say. They'll say, I like I like the salvation story in the New Testament, but I can't believe in creation. What they're saying is they're smart enough to pick and choose, and that they know more than God. So first of all, I think it's a weak point to begin with. Secondly, it is very common, and I would say that practically all people who became Christians over time from here back have a struggle with God being able to do all these things on a 24-hour day. It's not at all uncommon. It's perfectly reasonable that they could have a struggle with it. And frankly, if we take a look at an omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, omnijudicious God, who is El Shaddai, he is the Lord Almighty, they're willing to accept that he could create the earth on one day and trees, plants, shrubs, etc. on one day. And then they're willing to accept the flying animals and the swimming animals and so forth on one day. And then they struggle with dealing with day 6. Now, first of all, God tells us it's a day, but um, I would say that the vast majority of all Christians struggled with that at first when they became Christians because they've been so indoctrinated with evolutionary thinking. And I would say that that's me too. I mean, for 16 months, I still believed in an old Earth because of my evolutionary training, but I was reading the Bible and I was looking at this and I was reevaluating science again all over from scratch. And then I realized, yeah, a lot goes on day 6, but when you've got a God like our God, that's nothing for him. I mean, if he can speak the sun, the moon, the stars, and planets, etc., into existence in one day, to do everything he did on day 6 is nothing. And so God could have done everything he did on the first 5 days in the first second. And I've really come to think about this. When people say, well, I just can't believe you could do all this on day 4, or all that on day 5, or all that on day 6. I've studied it, and day 6 is the only day of the 6 that would absolutely require sequential time. I mean, that's obvious by reading. But he could have done everything else in the first second, and may have. I wasn't there, I don't know, but he could have done all of that in the first second and waited 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds to do day 2 and then day 3. But day 6 obviously has sequential time. There's conversations that are recorded, events that are recorded in a sequence. Now, having took a look at this for 50 years, I now ask myself one question, which is, why did he take so long?
Yeah.
I'm serious about that.
Mhm.
But day 6 does require a 24-hour period of sequential events. There's no question about that. But God is so big that he could do everything in that one day that's recorded for us. But he created all of the land animals, including dinosaurs. He then makes man. He assembles him from previously existing materials. He takes the atoms of the earth that he spoke into existence on day 1 and assembles, makes, manufactures, however you want to look at it, the body of the man. And then he breathes the breath of life, the soul, into the body, makes it animate. And then he takes the spirit of Adam, which was prepared beforehand, places it inside the body, and man becomes a complete whole human being. And then he will cause Adam to go into sleep. God will perform a surgical operation, take all the material necessary for the body of Eve from outside the body of the man, transforms it by reshaping it into Eve, adds a spirit of her own to that body, and unites them. And then, of course, Adam accepts the gift, names the animals, and accepts the gift. And God has the first marriage ceremony in human history. But it can all be done very easily. People tend to think, first of all, the name of the animals, they think, is the longest process, and would it take days to do it? Well,
Right.
first of all, it was only land animals, as far as we know. Secondly, there's only about 10,000 kinds of animals alive today. But then again, people forget that the word kind in the Bible doesn't mean species. It doesn't even mean genus. It just means family. And for example, there's only about 260 families of birds. I'm speaking from our taxonomic system. And so when you take a look at only a few hundred families or kinds, as it's in the Bible, it really wouldn't take that long. And remember that Adam was born with a perfect human mind, perfect for a human, and pre-programmed with all the words. After all, he was talking to God before he named the animals, so he had to have a complete language, complete vocabulary. God never tells him these are the names of the animals. He says, you name them. You got enough words in your vocabulary, you name them. And God brings these pairs by, and Adam's just dictating. A couple of hours probably be enough. And so they don't think about it. They think, well, he had to say this is a dachshund, and that's a German Shepherd, and this is a whippet. No, because those didn't exist. He simply said dog, cat, horse. That's it. Because the separation into varieties called species and genus today, and even variety and race and so on, came later. That comes after the flood, and so it's not nearly the test that many people think it would be.
Well said, Dr. Gray. There's a lot there, and I appreciate that because it's a big one they like to point to. And they'll
Yes,
say,
but
well,
it is not a good argument.
yeah, especially if that's the best they got again, because it doesn't overturn all of the powerful arguments scripturally for young earth creation. And so they'll say, well, Adam, he had to take a lot of time, days to years to name the animals because
But
it
why?
takes, yeah, well, and they'll say, well, it takes precision to examine each one and to come up with a name that's suitable rather than, taking 20 seconds per animal.
Well,
So
he
aren't they kind of
probably took
inserting
less
a
than
lot of
that.
ideas there? Yeah.
but he already had the words in his head. He just had to apply them to these kinds. And again, there's only a
Right.
few hundred of this kind, a few hundred of that kind. We take, we're taking the reptiles, birds, mammals, amphibians, um, but but not so sure about the amphibians, frankly, because they like water. But nonetheless, Adam could have done this very quickly, and people just want to say, "Oh, it couldn't possibly have done it." Well, you're also saying God couldn't possibly have spoken hundreds of billions of galaxies into existence in one day, too. Might as well include
Right.
that.
Yeah. And as you pointed out, Adam was created special right from the hand of God, and he was created complete, no mutations. He had a brain full of information that was front loaded clearly. I mean, he would have understood certain things.
Absolutely. He had a head full of physics and surveying and math and architecture, totally pre-programmed. I mean, it's kind of like having an AI program. It was all there in the first
Right.
instance.
Yeah.
And then he just had to use it. And the bad news is it's been deteriorating ever since.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, in a way, that argument is based on the assumption that the way we are today, our thinking processes today,
Yeah.
our deficiencies today apply to Adam, and they
Well,
don't.
and God has infinite intelligence. Okay. Now he programmed each creature with the information it needed to survive instantaneously,
Yes.
what we call functioning maturity. And that included Adam and Eve, They had all of that information, and they knew it immediately. They had the language, they had the words. Again, we're not talking about greyhounds and German shepherds and English sheepdogs. We're talking about canine-like creatures, which includes everything from foxes, coyotes, wolves, um, normal dogs as we think of them. But any canine creature was a canine. It was, and like I said, he wouldn't have used the word dog. That's an English word anyway. But simply say that it was a canine creature, it was a feline creature, it was a bovine creature, and that's it.
Yeah.
There were no varieties. There were no multiple forms. And so he wasn't busy doing all that. And the same thing with loading the ark. God sent the animals to Noah. He only had to build the ark according to God's blueprints. But God sent the animals, and he sent one pair of each kind that was unclean, 3.5 pairs of each kind that was clean. A lot of things weren't included, nothing marine, no amphibians, because they would all survive in the water to begin with. And so most birds, if not all, it could be all, but we tend to think things like penguins probably weren't actually sent to the ark because they really do need to be wet. Amphibians need to be wet, and those kind of creatures would have survived on the floating logs, the billions and billions of floating tree trunks and so on. So they didn't need to be there. And the qualifier on the ark was live on dry land and breathe air through nostrils. And so the total number of kinds are much more in the areas of around 900 or so. So it helps again to realize that the minimum number of animals in the ark was about 1,800. But you have to include there that there were, 3.5 pairs of the clean, which increases the number of it. But it could be anything from 1,800 to 17,500 animals, and you'd have all you needed.
Yeah.
And again, he didn't send a poodle and a German shepherd. He sent one pair of canine-like creatures with the genetic variability that then would produce all the varieties that we have today, the hundreds of different kinds of dogs or breeds or however you want to recognize it.
Yeah. Noah probably never seen a poodle
I
or a
guarantee you
Great
never
Dane.
did. The Egyptians bred poodles as duck hunting dogs in Egypt 2,000 years ago, and there were no poodles before the flood. There were no poodles right after the flood either.
Right.
You had Heinz 57 dogs. Mutts.
Yeah, and all those changes into domesticated dogs, as you've pointed out before, domestic dogs, is based on the pre-existing genetic variability for those
That's
variations
just
to
it.
come about in the first place.
Once Adam sinned, I mean, the instant Adam sinned, everything in the universe, the farthest atom, wherever it may be, the entire thing started to decay because one imperfection makes the entire universe imperfect. And that includes the decay of genetic information, which, as I said, is one of the strongest arguments for a young Earth. But in that decay of genetic information, God would know. Noah didn't know this. Noah didn't have an understanding of genetics. And at that time, there was not a great separation within each kind. I mean, dogs were still Heinz 57 dogs. But God did know which animals had the least loss of genetic information. And he would have sent the male and the female with the least loss, the greatest amount of still genetic information that was uncorrupted. And the same thing with the 3.5 pairs of the clean. But only God would be able to make that determination. And so he sent those animals with the least loss on the ark, and they started to reproduce after their kinds. But in terms of getting species, uh, genus and species as we have today, that's basically human manipulation. Of course, in some cases, it would be due to the environment without humans having to be involved, such as short-haired dogs don't live very long in the Arctic, and long-haired dogs aren't real good in the tropics either. Um, that's what nature would cause some sieving action. But in terms of getting the breeds that we have today, it's purely human intervention. People that determine which male and which female will breed. And so that's not natural selection, that's artificial selection.
That's right. Excellent points. And so, Dr. Grady, before I move to the next big argument, I'm kind of curious. The, the big reason why God gave the animals for Adam to name, was that to demonstrate his dominion over the animal kingdom?
Well, that's just it. See, God was in charge of everything, but he says, I'm going to give you the dominion on the earth.
Hmm.
And again, Satan had no dominion on the earth until Adam sinned and gave it to him. Adam had every right. When Satan shows up, Adam had every right and should have told him, "Be gone! You're lying. You're misquoting God, etc." But unfortunately, he didn't. Um, but God knew that ahead of time too, so He already had the plan of salvation before the foundation of the earth was even, the foundation of the universe was even laid. Um, so man, being imperfect after sinning, lost his rights and forfeited them to Satan. But Satan had no right to be on the earth. He was not the ruler of the earth. God gave that to Adam, but Adam then forfeited it.
Yeah, I appreciate those points, Dr. Grady.